For most of my life, prayer was a negotiation. I approached the throne of God not as a supplicant, but as a CEO presenting a quarterly report. My prayers were blueprints, detailed proposals sent to the heavens with an expected return date. I spoke to the Almighty in the language of action, of outcomes, of victory. I, a man who had built an empire from ambition, and saw faith as the ultimate acquisition. But I never understood that the one thing you cannot build, control, or conquer is the soul. There was a night that serves as the great fault line in my life. The moment everything I thought I knew fractured. The house was dark, the city's roar a distant hum. I sat by a window, a silhouette against the indifferent stars, and felt the immense, crushing weight of my own smallness. The fortress of ego I had spent a lifetime constructing felt like a sandcastle against a rising tide. So I prayed, but for the first time, it was not a demand. It was a whisper of surrender. God, I said into the darkness, I've won every war I was supposed to. I've climbed every mountain, but the view from the top is empty. I am lost. I waited for the thunderclap, the parting of the clouds, the burning bush. I expected a sign, a divine memo confirming receipt of my plea. What I received was a silence so absolute, so profound. It felt like a physical presence, a silence that did not soothe, but scoured. In that unblinking void, I felt the familiar sting of failure. He's not listening, the old voice of pride whispered. You've finally overdrawn your account with heaven. We, the builders and the fighters, measure God's love by the speed of his response. We mistake his patience for indifference. I wanted a miracle on my schedule, but faith, I was about to learn, operates in a different time zone. That night began my education in the language of stillness. I didn't know it then, but God's silence was not a slammed door. It was a clearing of the room, a sacred space being prepared for a conversation deeper than words could ever hold. He was not ignoring my prayer. He was deconstructing the man who was praying. I had always believed control was the antidote to chaos. My entire life was a testament to the power of will. If a deal soured, I renegotiated. If a wall cracked, I rebuilt it stronger. But this inner emptiness, this spiritual famine, was a problem my usual tactics could not solve. The human heart, I discovered, is not a skyscraper to be managed. It is a wild, untamable sea. The more I tried to command the waves of my own anxiety, the more violently they crashed against the shores of my sanity. Peace, I had always assumed, was the prize you won after the last battle. I now saw it was the quiet surrender before the battle even begins. And letting go, for a man like me, was the most brutal fight of all. God began to show me that my obsession with control was the very lock on my own cage. My prayers for strength were, in reality, prayers for a tighter grip. So he answered, not by giving me more strength, but by gently prying my fingers open, one by one. He did not make me tougher. He began the painful, terrifying work of making me softer. He answered my prayer for power by showing me the strength in surrender. The world teaches you that wisdom is knowing what to do next. But divine wisdom, I learned, is being okay with not knowing. It is the ability to stand in the mystery, to trust the unseen path, to stop being the hero of your own story and become a humble character in a much grander one. I had always thought losing control was synonymous with losing everything. It turned out to be the first step toward finding the only thing that mattered. As the hours of that long night bled into one another, the silence began to transform. It was no longer a void, but a vessel. I closed my eyes and stopped listening for a voice. Instead, I listened to the quiet itself, and in its depths, I felt a resonance, a gentle pulse of peace that began to harmonize with my own frantic heartbeat. I realized I had spent my life talking at God, never with him. My faith had been a monologue. But in that stillness, a true dialogue began. His presence was not in a sound, but in the very fabric of the silence that held me. It was a presence that didn't need to speak to be understood. It simply said, without words, Be still. You don't need answers. You need me. I finally understood that his silence wasn't the absence of a reply. It was the reply itself. That night, I did not receive the miracle I wanted. I received a far greater one. I received a peace that did not depend on my circumstances. And once you have tasted that kind of peace, the world's offerings forever lose their flavor. The transformation was not a lightning strike, but a slow dawn. God hadn't been idle in his silence. He had been a craftsman, patiently working on the flawed material of my soul. I learned that before God builds a man up, he must first tear him down to the foundation. He is a divine architect who knows that the ego is a faulty cornerstone. My prayers began to change. I used to pray for victory. Now I prayed for wisdom. I used to ask him to change others. Now I asked him to change me. When I prayed, Lord, fix this situation, his silence replied, I'm fixing you. When I cried out, why won't you answer me? The quiet echoed back, so you can finally hear yourself. This is the sacred alchemy of faith. It happens in the unseen corners of the heart. And once it begins, you stop chasing the grand, theatrical miracles, because you realize your own changing heart is the greatest miracle of all. Your perspective shifts. The world is the same, but you are seeing it with new eyes. I began to find evidence of grace, not in open doors, but in closed ones, understanding that God's protection often looks like man's rejection. His mercy often arrives disguised as a delay. It is easy to believe in a God of abundance during the harvest, but true faith is forged in the winter of our discontent, when the ground is hard and the sky is gray. And we still whisper, I trust you. The small miracles started to appear, a moment of unexpected kindness, a sudden lifting of anxiety, the beauty of a sunrise after a sleepless night. These were not coincidences. They were love notes from eternity, reminders that I was not forgotten. I now know that faith is not the rigid, unbending strength I once admired. It is a softer thing. It is the courage to be vulnerable, the grace to forgive, the wisdom to be led. God does not always calm the storm around you. Sometimes he calms the storm within you, and a calm sailor is not afraid of the waves. The man I was built fortresses. The man I am becoming seeks to build a cathedral of quiet within his own heart. He understands that peace is not found in having all the answers, but in becoming comfortable with the questions. People ask how I still believe after all the battles and betrayals. I tell them it is because I have experienced the alternative. To walk without faith is to carry the full weight of the world on your own shoulders. It is an exhausting and lonely way to live. If you are in that silent place right now, if your prayers seem to hit a ceiling of brass, know this, you are not being ignored. You are being prepared. The divine craftsman is at work. Do not curse the silence. Listen to it. For one day, you will look back on this season, not as a time of waiting, but as a time of becoming. And you will realize he didn't answer your prayer. He answered your soul.